Today we are going to be discussing the Develop module in Lightroom. You'll be exporting the photo that we are working on today and uploading it as your finished assignment. So far we have been working largely in the library of Lightroom. We've discussed some keywording, other metadata that we can add to the photographs. Today we're going to move on from the library and we're going to move into the Develop module. In the Develop module, we have a navigator which allows us to zoom in on things and to move around and see where we are in our photograph. So if we wanted to be able to zoom in and edit closely. We have presets. And presets allow us to experiment with other people's ideas of how they might edit a photograph. Presets are tough because you never know what the photograph is going to look like. Like this one is already very saturated, this one is very desaturated, and so the effects of the edits look very different on each photograph. So it's kind of like an Instagram filter, I guess. And they have a full list. In fact, you can buy presets from professional photographers. Next, we can create snapshots, which is basically a point in editing history where I say, oh, I like this, but I'm going to keep editing. I can show you that a little bit later. Next is our history. So if I do anything to my photograph, that'll be kept track of in the history. So if at any point in time I want to go backwards in my history, I can do that here. Lastly is collections, and this is one way to organize your photographs for editing. We don't really use collections, so we'll keep that separate. Alright, down here we have copy and paste. That's for copying our edits and pasting them to another photo that might be similar. And here we have our thumbnails. We're going to scroll over in our thumbnails to photo number 16. It looks like this. If your photo number 16 is not the same as mine, please find this photograph. This is the one we're going to be editing today. In the upper right-hand corner of our window, so we have our thumbnails at the bottom, and on the right-hand side we have our edits. We'll get to this in just a moment. I want to go all the way to the top. Notice we have library, develop, map, book, slideshow, print, and web. We're actually going to get rid of the ones we never use for this class. So in order to do that, we're going to right click, and it brings up this drop down list, and we're going to get rid of map, and we're going to right click again, and we're going to get rid of book, we're going to right click again, we're going to get rid of slideshow, and then we're going to right click again, and we're going to get rid of web. So the three modules that we use are library, develop, and print. So we're currently working in the Develop module. And in the Develop module, we're going to start by looking at the histogram. So I collapsed all of my sections just so you can see what they all are. Anytime you want to expand one, you can click on it. If one happened to disappear, which has happened before, it probably disappeared because you right-clicked on that section and possibly removed it. So if I try to remove that, I don't know if it'll let me. Okay, good. It won't let me anymore. Anyway, you can get those back. If you've made them disappear for some reason, you can get them back. Alright, so we're going to start at the top here with histogram. The histogram is a measurement of the distribution of values and colors in your photograph. So on the left-hand side of the histogram, this represents the darks. On the right-hand side of the histogram, this represents the lights. You'll notice we have some triangles at the top here. If you click on the triangle, or even put your mouse over the triangle, you'll notice that there's blue little shapes showing up on my image. I'm going to click on that for now, and that's going to turn on the clipping permanently. Clipping means that these shapes right here have gone all the way to black and have no more detail in them. And since I haven't edited this photo yet, that is true of the main photo. I will never be able to get any more detail out of these blue areas. I can do the same thing with the whites over here, and what you'll notice is that I have nothing that's actually clipped into white. So there's nothing in this photograph that is white. That's great. That's fine. I'm hoped not to do that with this photograph. The blacks is a little disappointing, but it's hard to get both not to clip. All right, so we can turn on and off the show clipping just by clicking on the triangle. What I'd like you to do now is go to Google Classroom, and in the assignment, I would like you to type histogram in the comments. So there will be an assignment here. It isn't there yet. There will be an assignment under your editing and managing files. Type in the comments histogram, and then give me a brief definition of what the histogram is. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is hit Basic. And under Basic is all of our main editing controls. Up top, if I want it to be in color, I click there. We're already editing in color, so nothing happened. If I want it to be in black and white, I can click there. Now it's converted to black and white, so I can always shift back and forth between black and white and color. Moving down, I can click on a variety of profiles. We're not going to head there yet. Next is white balance, and normally I would do white balance first, but we're not going to do it first here because I can't really see the colors that are going on here. So the next thing I'm going to jump to is exposure. And this is the way that my editing works. I work from top to bottom normally in order to get my photo to look the way I want it to look. So we're going to start with exposure. Drag the exposure to the right, and what you're going to notice in the photograph is that I start to get details out of those dark shadowy areas that I couldn't see before, but I'm blowing out my sky and my water, so that's kind of bad. If I move it in the opposite direction, my sky starts to get darker, and at some point the whole thing just gets too dark. So exposure is kind of a global edit where it raises the exposure of the entire image, making it either brighter or darker. The problem with that is sometimes I don't want the whole thing brighter or darker. I only want sections brighter or darker. Also look at how the histogram is moving as I'm moving this. The darks start to spread out on the left side. The lights start to collapse together on the right. So I'm losing details in the lights. I'm getting more details in the darks. All right, so exposure at this point in time isn't really going to work for me on this photograph. So we're going to go next to contrast. I will say I'm going to do a little bit of exposure. My key thing is I want to avoid going all the way to white. So I'm going to turn on my clipping. I'm going to raise the exposure just slightly until it starts to clip. So there we go. It started to clip right there. So I'm going to pull it back from the edge so I don't have that red line. And I'm almost all the way to white with my exposure. So I've got some decent details. I have lost my sky, but I can pull that back in a later setting. All right. My contrast, I can either lower my contrast, which starts to bring the middle tones together as I look at my histogram, or it starts to spread those things apart. So contrast tries to push the lights lighter and the darks darker and separate them from the middle. Moves the opposite direction when I do that. So I'm going to actually lower my contrast slightly. You can look at the numbers that I'm using, 1.26 for exposure and -31 for contrast right now. Now my highlights is where I can start to rescue that sky. The sky got blown out when I raised the exposure. I'm going to bring the highlights back down. That gives me some additional color back in the sky. My shadows, so I took that down to -100. My shadows, I'm going to raise a little bit. I'm going to take that up to about +50, somewhere in there. Now whites, if I wanted to try and increase the whites in this photograph, I could. but you can see I'm starting to lose that details in the sky, so I don't really want to play with the whites. Anytime I want to reset something, I can double click on the word and it will reset it to its original setting. Blacks, however, this got a little washed out, and so I'm losing some of my contrast, so I'm going to try and bring back some blacks here. I'm happy with that. I'm about negative, let's put that at negative 70-ish. All right. So those are my basic exposure controls that allow me to control the lightness or the darkness of the image in different sections. And I'm always keeping an eye on clipping to make sure I haven't clipped too much. The blacks I don't mind so much. The whites can be very problematic. So if I was concerned about the blacks, I could bring some of those blacks back. That's not too bad. All right, texture and clarity bring us either some additional texture, that's contrast between the different local pixels that'll enhance what the textures look like, since the rock is very textured. I like that. Clarity does something similar. You'll have to play with them to get a sense of what that does for you. I'm going to leave my clarity at 0. So I'm going to reset that. My texture's at about 58. Vibrance. Sorry, let's go to dehaze. We did texture and clarity. Dehaze does exactly what you think it might. It removes kind of the haziness from the photo. So when I'm dealing with a sky, you'll notice things that are far away start to seem clearer, more intense in color. So it will intensify the color if I go to the right. If I go to the left, it starts to add haze and it starts to look very washed out. So on landscape photos, I will occasionally use the dehaze filter. I'm going to put it at about plus 30 on this photograph. Now we're down in vibrance and saturation. They're very similar. Vibrance is best for skin tones to avoid having somebody turn orange like an Oompa Loompa. So vibrance will intensify mostly the blues. Notice the orange in the background is intensifying a little bit, but it's mostly the blues that are intensifying here. I'm going to reset that. Let's try saturation now. Saturation is going to intensify everything all at once. So you can see that orange in the sky got super intense, but so did the blues. So vibrance is generally for working with skin tones, avoiding making those look weird, and it will enhance blues, greens, anything that's not a skin tone. Saturation intensifies all colors, especially the oranges and reds. And if I move either of these in the opposite direction, it will turn it to black and white. The most desaturated color is black and white. All right, so I'm going to set the saturation at about 30-ish, and I'm going to set the vibrance a little bit higher here to get those blues to pop out at about 60-ish. All right. So I'm pretty happy with how that looks. This is the basics of editing in Lightroom. If I wanted to create a snapshot right now, if I was happy with that edit, I can click snapshot. I'm just going to leave it with the name. There we go. There's a snapshot of the image. And what I can do after the snapshot, if I want to do some other edits and see what it looks like with other things done to it. Now I've got a slightly different edit going on here, and I can take another snapshot. Then I can switch between the two and see which one I like best. We are going to export this snapshot here. This is the one with the intensity pretty high, very saturated colors. So let's go up to File, Export. We're going to make sure our export settings are correct. For export location, I suggest you choose a specific folder. I'm going to go ahead and choose that folder. I'm going to place it on my desktop. I'm going to call that folder Final Work. I'm going to choose that. Once that's set, I can collapse it, and now that will always save my photos to Final Work. Now for file naming, I'm going to click Rename To. I'm going to select Custom Name and Sequence. I'm going to put my name and the name of the project. It's called Intro to Editing. There we go. It is not a video, so we can collapse that. The file settings, you can leave those alone. Image sizing, we're going to leave that alone. Output sharpening is closed. Metadata, we're going to keep that the same. Watermarking we'll leave alone, and post-processing we'll leave alone. So that way, the next time you export, the only thing you have to change is the name of the assignment. I'm going to go ahead and hit export, and I'm done. Upload that file to Google Classroom.